I want to ask you about Syria. There's just horrific scenes coming out of that country, the torture and slaughter of religious minorities. Sadly, it's all too predictable. Tulsi Gabbard, amongst others, warned about precisely this happening, but it seems not everybody was aware. Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell were all too happy to do a softball interview with Islamist Ahmed al-Sahara. Let's have a look.
It's strange for me sitting with you because we were both in Iraq together in 2003, but we were on different sides. I was part of the American-British occupation, and you were fighting for Al-Qaeda against the occupation. And I never imagined I would sit down like this to talk to you in this way. What do you reflect over time on this experience and looking back over these years on that moment?
And Rory Stewart posted this on X about the interview with the jihadists, saying, amazing interview, a real privilege to be back in Syria, stunning turn of events and the most incredible story with so much unknown for the future. I mean, really, they describe this man as a fighter turned president. Douglas, are these two just incredibly naive or incredibly thick? Are there any other options at this point?
It's extraordinary. I mean, Alistair Campbell is just a deranged maniac by his own admission. Rory Stewart is a clever guy, but just look at that. Look at that extraordinary thing. He refers to himself when he was the governor, I think, of Nasiriyah province for a time after the 2003 war. He describes himself as being part of the occupation forces. And then the jihadist turned president as being anti-occupation. Now, if you start from the premise that most people think occupation sounds like a bad thing and being anti-occupation sounds like a good thing, that makes Rory Stewart the self-confessed bad guy, and the jihadists are just a kind of freedom fighter, let's throw off the evil oppressor colonialists type. What a way to frame yourself, your country, that war, and in particular, what a wonderful way to frame the man that you're interviewing. I mentioned on X this past week, if Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell had been interviewing somebody who voted for Brexit in 2016, or somebody who even voted for Trump in 2024, they would have thrown everything at them. It would have been a fulminating rage of hostile questions and hostile framings of the interview subject. But you have a jihadist in front of you who's just overtaken Syria, and it's all fawning and softballs. And it's really indicative of where a significant portion, actually, of the sort of centrist political class still is. And it's all about the usual things: self-loathing, self-blame. No one can do anything bad unless the West makes them do so. And, then lo and behold, the completely predictable happens. And the jihadist who takes over the Syrian government, under his watch, of course, ethnic minorities. It's the usual story across the Middle East. Wherever the Islamists move, everyone else loses, whether it's Christians, whether it's minority Islamic sects, whether it's any other minority. Everybody loses when the Islamists advance. And it's just so sad that, as it were, in Rory Stewart's terms, after all of these years, indeed, after all of these years, we've learned so little.
So little, and learnt so little from similar experiences elsewhere. I just, from someone who comes from the Middle East, I'm continuously shocked by just how naive educated people can be on that region. Now let's go to the UK, where Reform, they've gone from recording spectacular poll numbers. There was a poll where they were leading everybody. They were leading the Tories in every national poll at one stage. But now they're in the midst of this damaging internal row between Nigel Farage and Rupert Law. Douglas, can they recover from this? Can they be the dominant Conservative force in the UK? And what is this clash all about? Is it just a matter of egos?
It's actually a little early to say. You're right. Reform has been polling extraordinarily well in recent weeks. And as I see it, there's always, in small parties, new parties, there's always a lot of churn and turmoil. And I actually say in The Spectator this week, it requires quite a microscope sometimes to get under what's actually going on in such internal rows on the right as on the left. But from what I can see, it actually boils down for once to an issue of policy and not of personalities. Nigel Farage seems to have been making a grab for the moderate centre of politics, whilst Rupert Lowe has been going in a different direction. And Rupert Lowe has been going very hard, actually, in Parliament and on social media and so on, about issues like the deportation of illegal migrants in the UK. Now, Nigel Farage has been reacting to these statements of Rupert Lowe's by increasingly, it seems, giving interviews in which he says that it's just not possible to deport all of the illegal migrants who are in the UK, and he's not going to get into that discussion. I think that is a very, very interesting difference. As I say, maybe Farage is simply trying to tack to the political centre, and maybe Rupert Lowe is trying to appeal more to the right. Maybe they're both saying what they just actually think. But it is a very, very interesting disagreement, because to my mind, if you say we have perhaps millions of people in the country illegally, many of whom have been carrying out acts of criminality, all of whom carried out an act of criminality by breaking into the country illegally, then they should be made to leave. It seems to me that's a perfectly reasonable policy. Nigel Farage is clearly terrified of the policy or of saying that. And so instead he's saying, well, it just can't be done. I think there's not much point of a party of the right, particularly one to the right of the Conservatives, that simply says we're going to sit back and not do anything about the existential threats to our country. So I think it is actually beyond personalities for once. There's a serious rift here on the right. And it's going to be very interesting to see, because either Reform can continue to be a party where people who are opposed to the mainstream narrative of recent decades can put their trust, or it isn't, and it falls apart as so many small parties have before.
Yes, it needs to decide where it stands on that issue. That is an important one. And I've got to say, I'm pretty surprised by Nigel Farage's stance on that. Now, I mentioned the Guardian newspaper. They've made a big song and dance about leaving X. They said that was because the platform was full of disinformation and misinformation. Well, it's the Guardian that has had to issue a fulsome apology for disinformation, misinformation. The apology has been to you, Douglas, and from what I understand, a big fat check as well, because they falsely accused you of supporting violent racist attacks during anti-immigration protests in the UK last year. Tell me about this case. And just before you do, if I could just read from one of the court documents, this is about as comprehensive an apology as one could find. The defendant, through me, apologises unreservedly to Mr Murray and is pleased to set the record straight. It acknowledges that the allegations were false and has agreed to pay substantial damages. Douglas, congratulations on the victory. How did this come about?
Well, it came about because the journalist in question, a man called Kenan Malik, wrote an article last summer at a very heated and worrying time in the UK, which simply lied about me, simply spread falsehoods about me. And, if you're in any kind of public life, you have to get used to quite a lot of rough and tumble. And, you when you think of reaching for the lawyers, then it's, usually it's quite rare, I think, that people actually, certainly people like me, feel the need to do that. But on this occasion, the column that the Observer published was so gratuitously false and untrue and so libelous and damaging, actually, that I decided I had to take action. I'm no fan of the Guardian newspaper group. I think that they have, whilst they pretend that they are the sort of sole arbiters of what is true, I think they spread an awful amount of falsehood. But this was so flagrantly
Yes.
false and demonstrably, provably false that I did take action. And they tried to defend themselves a bit, but it was completely impossible for them to defend the sloppy journalist, Kenan Malik, and his incredibly sloppy and vituperative journalism. And yes, they had to make a full apology, as you saw at the court in London this week, promise not to repeat the charges and pay what they call substantial damages as well as legal costs. I just think it's very important that people remember that it's, to use a phrase that The Guardian is fond of, a comment is free. Comment is free, but facts should be sacred. And it's not the case that writers for The Guardian newspaper group should simply be allowed to make up things, make up facts, lie, falsify information, and get away with it. So I'm very pleased that for once, the Observer, the Guardian newspaper group, have been held to rights. I wish it would happen more often, frankly.
Congratulations from everyone in Australia. I'll speak on behalf of the country. Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time tonight.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.